You feel the hush of those chambers still, but now the scene sharpens to something darker, the quiet presence of spies in silk and gold. For as much as queens trusted their companions, not all who dressed them laughed with them, or knelt beside their beds were loyal. The court was a living hive of ambition, and whispers were the honey. Even the closest confidantes could be double agents, slipping secrets through veiled words, carrying news from bedchamber to council chamber. The queen might confide in a maid with trembling relief, only to learn days later that her private sigh had been repeated to a bishop or a duke. In courts where loyalty was currency, betrayal was never far away. Imagine yourself standing near the chamber door. You hear laughter from within, the queen and her ladies giggling about a pompous noble's enormous hat. The sound feels innocent, yet one lady glances at the door as if measuring how much could be overheard. Later that night, she might repeat the joke, not out of malice but out of calculation, to hint to a rival courtier that she enjoys a certain intimacy with the queen. In that single act, the queen's trust is compromised, though she will not know it until consequences return to her. History provides chilling examples. In the Tudor court, the ladies-in-waiting of Henry VIII's wives were often questioned about what they had seen or heard. When Anne Boleyn fell from favour, it was her attendants who were interrogated about her every word, her moods, her supposed lovers. Did she laugh too warmly at a man? Did she sigh at the wrong moment? The women who once brushed her hair and held her hand in prayer became sources of evidence against her. Whether willingly or under pressure, their words sealed Anne's fate. Here lies the bitter truth. Companions were both shield and snare. Queens learned early to measure trust by degrees. Some attendants could be trusted with small confessions, complaints about meals, irritation at endless rituals. Others might be trusted with matters of state, the contents of letters, the names of allies, but few, if any, could be trusted with everything. A queen often had to layer her own secrets, telling one woman one fragment, another woman a different piece, so that no single confidant held the whole truth. It was a survival tactic, as much strategy as any battle plan. Think of Catherine de' Medici again. She navigated a French court rife with intrigue, surrounded by hostile nobles who despised her Florentine roots. To survive, she relied on her Italian ladies, but even among them caution was necessary. Catherine became adept at planting information, telling one companion a small detail, then watching to see how far it travelled. In this way, she turned her own household into a map of loyalty and betrayal. A clever queen did not only guard against spies, she used them. The trappings of wealth often disguised the spying. Ladies wore silks, jewels, and perfumes that marked them as elegant companions. But beneath the sheen, many carried hidden allegiances. One might secretly serve her family's faction, another might pass word to a foreign envoy, another might simply collect stories to elevate her own standing at court. Picture a woman fastening the queen's necklace with delicate fingers while mentally rehearsing how she will retell the queen's complaints about her husband. The betrayal is silent, invisible, wrapped in grace. And yet, not all spying was malicious. Sometimes attendants acted out of desperation. A maid whose family was poor might accept bribes to repeat scraps of information, believing it harmless. What harm, she might think, if I mention that the queen sighed after reading a letter? But in a court where sighs could signal treason, even the smallest word became dangerous. The irony was cruel. Queens needed intimacy, but intimacy exposed them. They required confidantes, but confidantes could betray them. It's a paradox you can almost feel pressing down on you now. The weight of constant vigilance, even in the privacy of candlelit chambers. Imagine never knowing if the hand braiding your hair was steady with loyalty or trembling with deceit. One quirky tidbit from medieval courts reveals just how far the paranoia reached. Some queens were said to dismiss their ladies suddenly in the middle of the night, pretending to be unwell, just to see which ones whispered about it the next morning. If gossip returned to her ears, she knew who could not be trusted. It was a test, almost like setting traps for mice in the pantry. In the great game of power, the queen herself became both strategist and detective. This climate of suspicion even extended to gifts. The confidant might present a queen with a small piece of jewelry, a brooch, a ring, a locket. To the queen it was a token of affection. To a rival faction, it was proof that the maid enjoyed extraordinary access. In courts where appearances mattered, a jewel could speak louder than a letter. Some historians suggest that certain jewels exchanged in courts carried secret meanings, like coded signals of who truly held the queen's ear. Imagine slipping a ring onto your finger and knowing that everyone who saw it would assume you had the queen's deepest trust, whether or not it was true. Of course, suspicion and spying did not eliminate genuine bonds. Many attendants remained fiercely loyal, guarding secrets until death. But the uncertainty never disappeared. You can almost picture a queen late at night, staring at the ceiling beams, asking herself, did she laugh too eagerly at my joke? Did she step too close to the ambassador? Did she repeat my words? Sleep would come slowly, heavy with doubt. Even the smallest domestic tasks were tangled with suspicion. If a maid carried a letter across the room, was she tempted to peek at the seal? If she poured the queen's wine, could she be bribed to add a powder? Spying was not only about listening, it was about opportunity, and attendants had more opportunities than anyone else. They handled clothing, food, correspondence, all the fragile details of daily life. It is little wonder that kings and ministers often tried to plant their own agents among the queen's household. To control her companions was to control her, and yet, in the midst of such danger, humour sometimes broke through. You can almost imagine a queen teasing her maid, tell the duke what you like about my dinner, but leave out that I dropped the spoon. The two laugh, though both know the joke hides a truth. Anything said here could be turned into a weapon outside. Humour became a shield, a way of acknowledging the risk without collapsing under it. The presence of spies shaped not only the queen's relationships, but also her behaviour. She learned to guard her face, to measure her words, to master the art of speaking without speaking. Many queens developed reputations for silence, for keeping their emotions hidden, even among closest companions. To modern ears, that might sound cold, but in their world it was survival. Better to be called distant than to be betrayed. There were moments, however, when masks slipped. A trusted confidant might see a queen weep openly, or hear her mutter curses under her breath. For a queen, such moments were both relief and danger. Relief because she could finally be human, danger because humanity could be weaponized. A single maid's testimony could undo years of careful control. That knowledge hung in the air like smoke, never fully cleared, always present. The world of spies in silk and gold was not one of daggers and assassinations, though those existed too, but of subtler, slower battles. It was about listening, repeating, twisting, withholding. It was about silence used as much as speech, and it was about the terrifying realization that sometimes the most dangerous enemy sat at the queen's own bedside, smiling, bowing, pretending to serve. You glance back at the chamber now, the candlelight flickering across faces that seem calm and devoted, but you know the truth. Behind one smile hides ambition, behind another kindness, behind another betrayal. The queen cannot know which is which until it is too late, and so she plays the endless game, trusting, doubting, confiding, testing, night after night, surrounded by companions who are at once her shield and her threat. In that game, every word matters, every glance is weighted, every silence is louder than a shout, and the queen, weary though she may be, cannot ever truly rest. For the forbidden nights of queens were not only filled with comfort and laughter, but with the quiet footsteps of spies dressed in silk, glittering in the same gold as loyalty itself. Secrecy also had its unspoken rules. What was shared in the chamber did not leave it. Attendants who broke this rule might face dismissal, disgrace, or worse. There are records of ladies-in-waiting banished or imprisoned, simply for repeating private words. Queens lived in constant awareness that every whisper was both a comfort and a risk, yet still they whispered because silence was heavier than danger. In the stillness you notice the intimacy of these nights. Not romantic intimacy, though sometimes that too crept in, but a closeness born of shared survival. The queen, her crown set aside, speaking as one woman to another, the confidant listening, nodding, offering advice or simply presence. The glow of the fire softens every line of their faces, and for a brief moment they are not ruler and servant, but companions navigating the same uncertain night. And sometimes the conversation turned playful. Even queens enjoyed small jokes, teasing about the pompous bishop's endless sermons or the ridiculous size of a visiting noble's hat. One light joke could cut through the tension like a breeze. You can almost picture the queen smothering a laugh behind her hand. Warning: if anyone hears this, we'll both be in trouble. Humor became a secret rebellion, a way to push back against the suffocating weight of duty. The chamber quiets again. Outside, owls call in the night, and the air smells faintly of ash from dying candles. The queen's companions drift towards sleep, but she lies awake staring at the rafters, thinking of the decisions awaiting her at dawn. For now, though, she lets her thoughts roam freely, speaking to no one but herself in whispers. Tomorrow she will wear her crown again, smile in the council hall, and nod with grace. But tonight, within these walls, she is allowed to simply be. This is where the forbidden nights begin, not always scandalous, not always dramatic, but always secret. Because even queens needed a place where their truest selves could surface, if only for a few stolen hours in the glow of candlelight. There's something almost modern in this tension. It's not so different from celebrities today, relying on personal assistants who know every detail of their lives, yet fearing betrayal in tabloids. Replace the medieval court with Hollywood, and the same fragile trust emerges, privacy guarded by those too close to ignore, always at risk of exposure. In both cases, survival depends on a circle of trust tighter than a knot in a rope. A light joke sometimes slipped through the weight. One record tells of a queen who, after an endless banquet, collapsed into a chair and sighed, "If I must eat one more roasted peacock, bury me with its feathers." You can picture her maid's stifling laughter, exchanging quick glances, knowing that humor in these chambers was as dangerous as it was healing. To laugh at the rituals of court was to rebel, if only for a heartbeat. The role of Confidantes extended beyond comfort. They carried letters, guarded jewels, delivered herbs and medicines, and sometimes even acted as decoys. In one tale, the queen's maid wore her mistress's cloak to mislead spies watching the garden at night. Such loyalty was rarely recorded in chronicles. Yet without it, queens would have been vulnerable at every turn. Still, the cost of betrayal loomed like a shadow. Punishments for maids who leaked secrets were severe: dismissal at best, imprisonment or execution at worst. You can almost feel the weight of silence pressing on these women, the silence they carried for life. Many took their secrets to the grave, their loyalty never rewarded, their names forgotten by history, and so the bond between queens and their attendants remained one of the strangest in medieval life, a mix of intimacy and distance, affection and danger, trust and fear. To be a confidant was to live in the queen's light, yet always at risk of burning. To be a queen was to depend on others absolutely, even as she doubted them constantly. In the end, these silent companions were the keepers of stories we will never fully know. They heard the cries muffled into pillows, the laughter that escaped despite exhaustion, the muttered prayers when illness threatened, the confessions of love and fear. They carried these whispers like jewels, hidden away where no historian's quill could reach. And though their names are lost, their presence still echoes in every tale of royal intrigue, every rumor of scandal, every midnight decision that shifted the course of kingdoms. Because behind every queen's crown, behind every polished facade of dignity, there was always a circle of women holding her secrets, silently, faithfully, dangerously. The silence of trusted chambers, the soft rustle of gowns, the flicker of dim light. These were the stage settings for stories that were never written down in ink, but instead lived in breath and heartbeat. Behind palace walls, when the guards' boots echoed down distant corridors and the torches guttered outside, another world stirred. This was the world of forbidden love and hidden desires, where queens stepped away from the rigid patterns of ceremony into moments of vulnerability and longing, sometimes sweet, sometimes perilous. You imagine a queen seated by her window, the glass panes still a rarity in much of Europe, the moonlight broken into jagged shards across her floor. She gazes into the courtyard where shadows fall like veils. In the daytime she is distant, untouchable, draped in velvet and crowned with jewels. But tonight she is just a woman, restless, craving more than the suffocating expectations of dynastic marriage. And at her side, perhaps too close for comfort, stands a confidant, not a knight, not a duke, not a king, but a woman who knows the queen's sighs as intimately as her smiles. Royal marriages were rarely about love. They were contracts, bargains struck between kingdoms to secure borders, seal peace treaties, or outmaneuver rivals. The queen's husband was chosen for her, sometimes when she was still a child. Imagine being 12 or 13, told you were already promised to a man twice your age, a stranger whose language you barely spoke. Love in such circumstances was not only rare, it was almost impossible. And yet, the heart does not always follow treaties. Hidden desires blossomed where proximity allowed, especially with those who shared the queen's daily life. Her companions, her ladies, those who knew her not as a symbol but as a human being. Take, for instance, the story of Queen Christina of Sweden in the 17th century. She was an eccentric ruler who resisted marriage altogether, insisting that no man could truly command her heart. Instead, she surrounded herself with women she adored, most notably Ebba Spa, to whom she wrote letters so tender that historians still debate whether they reveal friendship or romance. In one letter, she called Ebba the most beautiful one, a bedfellow. Of course, chroniclers of the time veiled such relationships in vague terms, unwilling to name them outright, but the emotional intensity is impossible to miss, and long before Christina, queens across Europe navigated the same forbidden currents. You picture Eleanor of Aquitaine again, restless and bold. Chroniclers accused her of scandal during the Second Crusade, whispering that she grew too close to her uncle Raymond of Poitiers in Antioch. Whether true or slander, the rumor reflects a truth. Queens, like any humans, yearned for bonds of the heart, even when politics forbade them. Behind the lattice work of chapels and the curtains of bedchambers, hidden glances and private words carried more weight than any feast or sermon. A forbidden bond did not need to be physical to be dangerous. Even the hint of preference could spark envy and suspicion. Imagine a queen leaning closer to a lady while laughing, their hands brushing as they shared a private joke. To outsiders, it looked harmless, but to courtiers, eager for gossip, such closeness could be interpreted as proof of favoritism or scandal. In courts where power hung on whispers, love itself became a weapon others could wield. Sometimes queens formed bonds not only with women but with men outside their marriages. A confidant might be a poet, a musician, or a courtier whose gentleness contrasted with the formality of kings. These encounters were nearly always dangerous. Queens lived under constant surveillance. Their bodies were considered the property of dynasties, their wombs instruments of succession. A child born under suspicion of illegitimacy could unravel entire kingdoms. That is why even rumors, not facts, just rumors of a queen's affair were enough to destroy reputations. Anne Boleyn herself was accused of adultery with several men, charges that most historians now agree were fabricated, but the whispers were powerful enough to justify her execution. In that sense, hidden desires were not only personal risks, they were national risks. Still, within the chamber, the heart did what it pleased. Picture the queen and her closest maid sitting together by the fire, the room quiet except for the crackle of wood. The queen complains of her loneliness. The maid gently replies with a word of comfort. The queen smiles faintly, grateful. The maid dares to take her hand, not as a servant to her mistress, but as one soul to another. The queen does not pull away. It is a moment so fleeting that if you blink you miss it. Yet in that gesture, centuries of frustration dissolve for one heartbeat. There were other forms of intimacy too, coded exchanges woven into daily rituals. A maid might braid the queen's hair slowly, letting her fingers linger longer than necessary. A queen might gift her favorite companion a jeweled brooch, claiming it was for loyal service, but choosing it with private meaning. Such tokens became silent confessions, safer than words, because words could betray. Objects worn quietly could remind without speaking, but secrecy was never simple. In palaces, where every door had listeners, queens had to invent methods to cloak affection. Sometimes it was in prayer, kneeling side by side in a chapel, whispering not only to God but to each other. Sometimes it was in letters disguised as spiritual advice or political counsel. One queen might write to another noblewoman, praising her virtue and friendship, when the depth of feeling beneath the lines went far beyond courtesy. These letters survive in archives, their ink faded, their passion veiled in modest phrases, waiting for careful readers to decode what could never be said aloud. Of course, not all bonds were romantic or scandalous. Some were simply emotional lifelines, queens desperate for understanding in marriages where husbands treated them as pawns. The tenderness of a companion, the warmth of another woman's laughter, or the reassurance of a shared secret could sustain them through long years of isolation. But to outsiders, even such innocent bonds look suspicious, precisely because queens were expected to be emotionally reserved. A single blush could feed a month of gossip. It's tempting to laugh at the paranoia of such courts, where a glance across a room might be spun into evidence of treason. But then, think of modern times. Even now, a celebrity photographed holding hands with a friend can spark headlines of scandal. Perhaps little has changed. Only the costumes and the candles have vanished. The risks of hidden desire were immense, but so were the rewards. For a queen, to feel truly seen was priceless. Amid endless ceremony and political machinations, the simple experience of being loved, of being desired for herself rather than her title, was rare beyond measure. That is why queens clung to these forbidden bonds despite the dangers. Desire gave them a piece of freedom they could find nowhere else. You can almost hear a light joke breaking the tension, perhaps a maid teasing the queen that her crown left an imprint on her forehead, or that her husband's snore could wake the dead. The queen laughs, grateful for humor that dissolves formality. For a moment the chamber feels like any other room where women gather to share confidences. And then, just as quickly, the weight returns, because they both know that if anyone else heard such laughter, it could be twisted into something darker. Forbidden love has always drawn fascination, but in these courts, it was less about passion and more about survival. Desires unspoken became fuel for resilience, helping queens endure the crushing expectations of dynastic duty. Yet once desire was spoken, once it crossed the fragile line into action, the danger became real. Some queens navigated it with skill, weaving secrecy like a cloak. Others stumbled and paid dearly, whether whispered between women in darkened chambers, hidden in letters disguised as sermons, or glimpsed in the stolen glances across a banquet hall. Forbidden love was always part of royal life. It thrived in silence, glowed in candlelight, and left echoes in rumors that outlasted lifetimes. And though chroniclers often tried to bury such stories, the hints remain, not in official histories, but in the shadows they could never quite erase. Because the truth is simple. Queens, too, were human. They longed, they loved, they risked. And in their hidden desires, they carved out brief fragments of freedom in worlds that denied them choice. Those moments, fragile, dangerous, but real, are the ones that still whisper to us across the centuries. Imagine, too, the recipients of these letters, a confidant unfolding a slip of parchment beneath her blankets, reading by the glow of a hidden lamp. The words make her cheeks flush, her heart ache, her loyalty deepen. She hides the note inside a book of psalms, where no one will think to look, praying that it remains undiscovered. The intimacy of such letters was profound. Private worlds created in ink, shared only between two hearts in a palace crowded with eyes. Sometimes the letters survived, locked away in archives, their ink faded, but still legible. Sometimes they were burned at dawn, the ashes scattered into hearth fires to erase their trace. One can almost hear the sigh of parchment curling into flame, secrets vanishing into smoke, and yet the knowledge of their existence lingered. Even destroyed letters left rumours in their wake, whispers that could swell into scandal. A light joke might slip through the solemnity here. Perhaps a queen scribbles in the margin of a note to her confidant, "If you find a blot of ink, blame my cat." He leapt across the desk again. You smile, realizing that even amid treacherous secrecy, humour found a way. The joke, small as it was, softened the weight of danger. After all, writing in the dark with flickering candles and wandering pets must have been a trial in itself. And so, letters became both lifeline and snare. They offered queens a voice, a way to reach beyond locked chambers, a chance to confess love or plot strategy. But every letter was a risk. Every folded scrap, a possible noose. The act of slipping a note through the dark was at once daring and desperate, like tossing a stone into a river and hoping it reached the far bank without sinking. The chamber grows still again. The queen rests her hand on the sealed parchment, reluctant to let it go. She knows that once it leaves her, it is no longer hers, but she also knows that without it, she remains voiceless. So she nods to her confidant, who bows, takes the letter, and disappears into the night. The queen leans back, extinguishes the candle, and lies awake, listening to the silence. Somewhere in the darkened corridors, her words are moving, carried in hidden hands, carrying with them the weight of her heart, her strategy, her danger. Letters slipped in the dark, fragile, dangerous, essential with a breath of forbidden nights. Without them, queens could not love, could not scheme, could not truly live. With them they risked everything, and still they wrote because silence was heavier than peril, and words, even stolen, were a queen's truest weapon. The night deepens, and you can almost smell it now, not just the smoke of dying candles, but the layered scents that filled the secret chambers of queens. Perfumes, potions, and dangerous remedies hung in the air, woven into the very fabric of the forbidden nights. These substances were not only about beauty, they were about influence, survival, seduction, and sometimes death. To step into the queen's private quarters was to breathe in a strange apothecary of comfort and peril, every fragrance and vial carrying its own story. You picture the scene. A carved wooden chest stands at the foot of the bed, bound in iron and locked with a key that never leaves the queen's side. Inside are not jewels or gold, but tiny glass phials, jars of powder, packets of dried herbs wrapped in cloth. The glow of a single lamp makes their shadows stretch across the wall, eerie shapes that hint at both healing and harm. Her attendants know better than to handle them carelessly. One wrong measure of a powder could soothe a headache, but two could still the breath entirely. Medieval courts were steeped in the use of perfumes. Rosewater was a favourite, sprinkled on clothes, dripped into baths, dabbed on wrists. Queens might request it daily, hoping to mask the less pleasant smells of their surroundings. Damp stone, sweat-soaked rushes, the faint reek of chamber pots. But perfume was never only about cleanliness. It was a tool of allure. A subtle waft of jasmine could soften a husband's mood. A stronger blend of musk might signal confidence at a banquet, and a carefully chosen concoction could remind a confidant of a private promise, turning scent itself into code. Some perfumes were said to hold almost magical properties. Recipes survive in medieval manuscripts. Mixes of cloves, ambergris, cinnamon, and rose meant not only to please the nose but to stir the blood. You can imagine a confidant dabbing a drop of this mixture onto her wrist before handing the queen a letter, the fragrance itself a secret message. Did the queen notice? Did she inhale and smile faintly, understanding what was meant? In a world where open affection was forbidden, perfume became a language of its own. But perfumes were only the gentlest layer of this hidden world. Beneath them lay the potions, remedies brewed in shadows, meant to heal, to calm, or to control. Queens often suffered from ailments born of stress, headaches, fainting spells, stomach pain. Physicians prescribed draughts of herbs, but many queens turned to their companions for mixtures less official, concoctions whispered down through families of women. Chamomile for rest, valerian for nerves, mint for digestion. A confidante might grind the herbs with her own hands, adding a pinch of honey to soften the taste, presenting it as a simple act of care. Yet not all remedies were so innocent. Some were meant to dull fertility, to prevent conception in marriages where the queen feared producing heirs she could not control. Others were meant to encourage it, forcing the body to try for pregnancy again and again. These potions were dangerous, often toxic, but desperation outweighed caution. Queens, like all women of their age, lived under constant pressure to bear children. Their wombs were the foundation of dynasties, and when children did not come, the blame rarely fell on kings. So, in the quiet of night, confidantes slipped bitter brews into goblets of wine, hoping the mixture would answer the prayers that echoed in every chapel. One strange tidbit tells of remedies involving powdered gemstones, pearls crushed into dust and stirred into water, emeralds ground into paste. Physicians insisted these substances held curative powers, though in truth they likely offered more grit than healing. Still, the queen might sip such a draught, trusting that her companions would not give her harm. Imagine the grit of pearl dust between her teeth, her face betraying no sign of distaste, because in a court where appearances meant everything, even drinking crushed jewels had to look graceful. But more dangerous than perfumes or potions were the remedies meant to harm. Poisons disguised as medicine could topple a court without a single blade drawn. Queens were always at risk, not only from enemies, but sometimes from allies too eager for change. Chroniclers whispered of arsenic hidden in powders, of belladonna slipped into drops of perfume, of aconite brewed into tea. The same confidant trusted to bring a soothing draught could also bring the queen's death. That uncertainty hung in the air like smoke, invisible, yet suffocating. It was not always queens who feared poisoning. Sometimes they used the suspicion to their advantage. Catherine de' Medici, for example, was rumoured to carry poisoned gloves, though no evidence survives that she actually did. Still, the rumour itself gave her power. If courtiers believed her capable of slipping poison with a touch, they were more cautious in her presence. In a court of whispers, sometimes fear was as potent as the real thing. Imagine a queen preparing for bed. A confidant lights a small censer, filling the room with the sharp tang of frankincense and myrrh. The smoke curls upward, catching the candlelight, casting ghostly shapes across the walls. The queen inhales deeply, the fragrance soothing her nerves after a day of endless ceremony. Another companion approaches with a small cup, offering a draught of warm wine infused with herbs. The queen sips, trusting or perhaps pretending to trust, for she cannot show doubt. To question the gift would be to insult the hand that gave it. Yet in her mind, she wonders, is this comfort or conspiracy? This nightly ritual of perfumes and potions was a kind of theatre. Each attendant played her role, one preparing the perfumes, one grinding herbs, one holding the cup steady. The queen was both audience and actor, accepting their care while silently judging their loyalty. A careless slip, too much powder, too strong a scent, might raise suspicion, and in courts where suspicion could end lives, every gesture mattered. Even amid the danger, humour found its place. Picture a queen sneezing violently after a maid sprinkled too much rosewater in the air, then laughing and muttering, "Well, at least the fleas will die of sweetness." The attendants chuckle softly, grateful for the release of tension. Jokes like these, whispered in the smoky air, reminded everyone that even queens longed for ordinary moments of levity. To modern ears, this reliance on scents and potions might sound eccentric, almost quaint. But think of your own world: shelves lined with perfumes, candles promising relaxation, pills promising relief. The difference is not so great. What queens called remedies, you might call supplements. What they trusted as perfume magic, you might label aromatherapy. The names change, the longing for comfort remains. Yet for queens, the stakes were higher. A bottle of lavender oil on your nightstand might promise a good night's sleep. For them, a vial of lavender infusion might promise a political future, an heir, a calmer king, or a fleeting sense of control in a life where little was their own. And sometimes the same vial might hold enough belladonna to end the story entirely. The chamber, heavy with perfume and smoke, becomes almost dizzying in your mind. You imagine the queen leaning back against her cushions, her hair unbound, her eyelids drooping as the potion takes effect. Around her, her companions move softly, adjusting blankets, extinguishing candles, murmuring prayers. To them this is routine. To her it is both comfort and risk. For every night she accepts their remedies, she places her life in their hands. And this is the strange truth of forbidden nights. The queen was never alone, never free, never certain. Her perfumes might delight, her potions might heal, her remedies might soothe, or they might betray, deceive, destroy. Trust and danger mingled in every fragrance, every sip, every breath. To be a queen was to inhale both beauty and peril. Night after night, through the smoke of candles and the clink of tiny glass vials, perfumes, potions, and dangerous remedies were not accessories to royal life. They were its essence. They offered queens the illusion of control, the hope of love, the possibility of healing, and the shadow of death. And though centuries have passed, you can almost smell them still, lingering in the air of those chambers, whispers of danger masked by the sweetness of roses. The chamber grows stifling, with smoke and perfume heavy in the air, and so your mind drifts outward, to the gardens, the courtyards, the balconies bathed in moonlight. Queens did not always remain behind walls, even in the strictest courts. There were times when a woman of power slipped into disguises, walked quietly to a window, or even stole through a hidden passage to meet her confidantes under the cover of night. The image seems almost too daring, a queen leaving her chamber without fanfare, her silk robes exchanged for plain wool, her jewels hidden, her crown left far behind. Yet it happened because secrecy sometimes demanded movement, and the night provided cover for things the daylight would never allow. Picture her at the edge of her room, a plain cloak fastened around her shoulders. Her face is partially hidden by a hood, the faintest scent of rosewater still clinging to her skin. Around her, attendants bustle, but only one or two trusted companions know the plan. A servant distracts the guards, perhaps by claiming the queen feels unwell and needs privacy, and in those few stolen moments, the queen slips into the passageways that lace through the castle like veins. Stairwells hidden behind tapestries, narrow doors leading to gardens. Every palace had them, for defense and for secrecy, and queens, though watched by all, sometimes knew them better than anyone. It is a curious contradiction. Queens were meant to be visible, the symbols of dynasties, yet visibility also suffocated. To speak privately, to meet secretly, to breathe air not thick with eyes, they had to become invisible. Disguise was not about trickery, so much as survival. If the queen wanted to whisper with a confidant without drawing suspicion, she could not appear as herself. She had to melt into the shadows to look like another woman entirely. Stories survive of queens dressing in plain linen to wander among their people. Some of these are likely romanticized tales, polished by chroniclers who loved a dramatic scene. Yet the possibility is real. Imagine Elizabeth I, restless in her chambers, yearning to know what Londoners said of her, without the filter of courtiers. Dressed as a commoner, she might have walked in gardens or sat at a window, overhearing laughter, whispers, even criticism. In that disguise, she could hear truths denied to her crown, but disguises were not always for public listening. More often they were for private meeting, queens seeking moments with trusted companions, or lovers forbidden by duty, found in cloaks and plain gowns, a chance to move unseen. In one story from Renaissance France, a queen was rumoured to have slipped into a garden at midnight, wearing a servant's cloak, to meet an envoy whose counsel she needed. Was it politics? Was it affection? The chroniclers never agreed, but the image is vivid. A queen of France, her hair hidden under a rough hood, her steps soft on the gravel, whispering with someone who could never be seen beside her in daylight. The risks were enormous. If discovered, she could be accused of plotting treason, adultery, or both. Even the act of leaving her chamber without permission could be treated as rebellion, and yet she risked it, because there were things too dangerous to say within walls thick with spies, a balcony, a garden, a window cracked open to the night. These became her sanctuary. There's something almost cinematic in the image. Moonlight falling across stone, torches flickering far below, the queen leaning over a balustrade, while her confidant whispers from the shadows. The scent of herbs drifts upward, lavender, rosemary, sage, mingling with the chill of night air. For the first time all day, she feels free, the crown's weight replaced by the soft pull of secrecy. One quirky tidbit: some queens were rumoured to exchange clothing with their ladies-in-waiting during these escapades. A trusted maid might don a fine gown and sit by the fire, her back to the door, imitating the queen's posture so that any casual intruder would believe Her Majesty was still inside. Meanwhile, the real queen moved unseen through the gardens. It was a daring ruse, and though it sounds like the plot of a play, history records such tricks being used by nobles and royals alike. The sheer audacity of it makes you smile. A medieval version of "you cover for me while I sneak out." But this was no teenage mischief. The stakes were deadly serious. A meeting at a moonlit window could seal alliances or break them. A whispered exchange in a garden might determine the outcome of war. Sometimes it was not politics but intimacy that drove the risk. Forbidden love, once ignited, often needed secrecy to survive, and secrecy demanded movement. A glance in a chamber could be dismissed, but a touch of hands in a dark garden was undeniable. Queens, deprived of freedom in daylight, sometimes claimed it at night, cloaked and hooded, hearts racing as fast as their footsteps. You can almost hear her breathing as she pauses in the shadow of an archway. The garden is empty, save for one figure waiting beneath a tree. She steps forward, her hood slipping back just enough for the confidant to recognize her face. They speak quietly, the words lost to the wind, but the intensity is clear. Perhaps they discuss letters, or poisons, or alliances. Perhaps they speak only of loneliness and longing. Whatever the topic, the night becomes a vessel of truth, safer than any council chamber. Of course, secrecy was fragile. Guards might notice footprints in the dew. A cloak might snag on a thorn bush, leaving a scrap of fabric as evidence. A chambermaid might whisper that the queen's bed was empty at midnight. Rumours grew quickly in courts where gossip was currency. A single slip could destroy the illusion of dignity. Queens were forced to maintain, yet they risked it anyway, because to suffocate in silence was worse than to gamble with scandal. It's here you might imagine a light joke slipping between them. Perhaps the queen whispers, "If anyone sees me like this, they'll mistake me for the washerwoman." The confidant laughs softly, tension easing for a heartbeat. Humour, as always, was a shield against fear. Even queens risking everything found ways to laugh in the shadows. To modernize, the image of a queen sneaking in disguise seems almost absurd, like imagining a world leader slipping out of a palace in jeans and sunglasses to buy groceries unnoticed. And yet, think of how often modern figures try to hide in plain sight, donning hats and casual clothes to escape the cameras. The impulse is timeless, the desire to be unseen, to live for a moment without scrutiny. Medieval queens simply used the tools they had, cloaks, shadows, and loyal companions. The practice also reveals something profound. Queens were not passive symbols. They sought agency, sometimes desperately, finding cracks in the structures that confined them. Disguises and moonlit meetings were not only about secrecy, they were about reclaiming power, if only for an hour. To walk unseen was to remind themselves they were still human, not only ornaments of dynasties. The castle itself became a participant in these nights. Balconies, gardens, hidden staircases, they were silent witnesses to whispered meetings. In some palaces, secret doors led directly from royal chambers to outdoor courtyards, built centuries earlier for defense, but repurposed as channels of secrecy. You can almost picture a queen pressing her hand against cold stone, finding the seam of a hidden door, slipping through it into the night where freedom waited. And what of the companions who joined her? Their loyalty was absolute, for they risked as much as she did. If caught, they could be dismissed, imprisoned, even executed. Yet they walked beside her, cloaks pulled tight, steps matched to hers. Some surely felt fear in their bones, but love, duty, or ambition kept them moving. In those nights they were not mere attendants, but co-conspirators, bound by the knowledge that the fate of kingdoms might hinge on their silence. The garden hushes now in your imagination. The queen and her confidant linger by a fountain, the water gleaming faintly in moonlight. Their conversation fades into silence, but the connection remains, a bond strengthened not only by words, but by the shared risk of being there at all. Soon she will slip back into her chamber, her cloak folded away, her crown returned to her brow. By dawn she will sit in council, untouchable once again, but for this hour, in disguise beneath the moon, she has been something more precious than queenly. She has been free. And so the forbidden nights of queens extended beyond locked chambers into the very air of the gardens and the shadows of balconies. Disguises were not games, but necessities. Moonlit windows not luxuries, but lifelines. In those stolen hours, queens risked everything to whisper truth, to grasp love, to taste freedom. And though the chronicles tried to bury these stories, the night air still remembers, scented with lavender, chilled by moonlight, warmed by the breath of women who dared to be more than the crowns they wore. The night air still clings to your imagination, cool and scented with lavender from hidden gardens, but soon you're pulled back inside the castle walls. Here the chapel waits, quiet and heavy with incense. The stone floor chills your feet, and candlelight flickers across painted saints, whose eyes seem always to follow. For queens, prayer was expected, ritualized, part of the endless display of piety that proved their virtue to courtiers and priests. But behind those ritual words, another reality stirred. Confessions whispered not only to God, but to the confidantes kneeling beside them. The chapel, more than the chamber, became the stage where faith and doubt mingled with forbidden trust. Picture it. The queen kneels on a worn cushion, her gown pooling around her like a tide of silk. At her side, her closest attendant lowers her head, hands folded, lips murmuring words that blend with the queen's. To any observer, it is a scene of flawless devotion. Two women joined in prayer, eyes lifted toward heaven. Yet within the hush, when the priest's voice echoes faintly from the altar, the queen leans slightly closer, her lips barely moving. "I cannot endure it much longer," she whispers. The words are swallowed by the murmur of psalms, but her confidant hears. Her answer comes as softly, "You are stronger than you think." Prayer offered cover for such exchanges. In the solemnity of worship, no one questioned lips moving. No one suspected that not all words were meant for God. And so, under painted ceilings and the scent of incense, queens spoke their truest thoughts, fears of betrayal, grief for lost children, longings for forbidden loves. These whispers woven into prayers were safer here than in chambers where spies might linger. For in chapels, silence was expected. Listening ears had to strain harder, giving secrets a fragile protection. Religious life was everywhere in the medieval and Renaissance courts. Queens were judged as much by their piety as by their lineage. A woman who missed mass too often could be accused of negligence, even heresy, but a woman who knelt too fervently could also be mocked for show. It was a careful balance, and queens learned to use their devotions as theatre. Yet in the shadows of chapels, when the candles burned low and the priests had gone, devotion became something else, a cloak for private intimacy. It wasn't always about complaints. Sometimes faith itself became the bond between queen and confidant, two women kneeling together, whispering the same prayers, sometimes weeping at the same psalms, could form a closeness deeper than ordinary friendship. To share tears before the Virgin Mary was to share a soul's raw truth. A queen might feel more understood in those moments than in any council meeting or royal bed, for while politics demanded masks, prayer seemed to allow them to slip, if only a little. Consider Isabella of Castile, remembered for her iron will and strict Catholic devotion. Chroniclers praise her hours spent in prayer, her pilgrimages, her public penance, yet it is easy to imagine that in the quiet of her private chapels, she too turned to her closest women, sharing doubts about the endless wars, fears for her children, or frustration with her husband Ferdinand. Such confessions would never be recorded, too human, too vulnerable for history's stage. But the silence of chapels held them, and yet doubts also lived here. Imagine the queen murmuring, "Does God hear me?" Her companion glances sideways, eyes still lowered, and whispers, "He does, but so do I." In that quiet reassurance, the lines between faith, friendship, and love blur. Confidantes became more than attendants. They became confessors without robes, priests without titles, absorbing the queen's burdens in silence. Sometimes, confessions in chapels carried more than emotion. They carried strategy. A queen might murmur doubts about a treaty or fears of rebellion, trusting her attendant to repeat nothing. To speak such thoughts aloud in council would have been unthinkable. To whisper them in prayer was safer. Ministers might watch a queen's every gesture, but few dared intrude upon the sanctity of devotion. Thus the chapel became a political chamber in disguise, its silence sheltering secrets as surely as its saints. A quirky detail surfaces here. In some courts, ladies in waiting were tasked with reading saints' lives aloud while the queen prepared for bed or prayed. These stories of miracles and martyrdom, meant to inspire piety, often became the backdrop for private confessions. Imagine a maid reading of Saint Agnes while the queen, half listening, leans close to whisper, "I envy her freedom." The irony is sharp. Saints died for their faith, but queens sometimes felt imprisoned by theirs. The chapel fades into silence in your mind, but the night does not end there. You follow the queen further into shadows where secrecy grows even sharper. The moments when foreign visitors arrived in the dark, slipping into castles not through gilded gates, but through postern doors and hidden passages. The queen's companions knew these nights well, for they were the ones who carried lamps, drew curtains, and ensured that no wandering servant stumbled upon what should never be seen. For as long as kingdoms existed, diplomacy and desire were twins, and queens were often caught in their tangled embrace. Picture the stillness of a royal garden at midnight. Torches burn low, their smoke carried by the wind. Beyond the hedges, a figure approaches, wrapped in a heavy cloak, hood drawn low. He is not an ordinary visitor. He might be a foreign envoy, a noble from another kingdom, or even a prince, whose arrival must never be recorded in the annals of ceremony. The queen's attendants wait, hearts pounding because they know how much rides on what happens next. The queen herself emerges from the shadows, no crown, no jewels, only a plain mantle over her shoulders. To any onlooker she might seem like any woman of the household, yet everyone here knows the truth. This encounter could change the fate of nations. Sometimes such meetings were purely political. Queens were not always free to shape treaties in council, but they could wield influence in private. A whispered promise, a hint of support, a shared confidence could shift alliances. Think of Catherine de' Medici, whose court in France swirled with foreign envoys, ambassadors, and conspirators. Her nights were said to be filled with secret interviews, carried out not in council chambers, but in galleries and gardens where her companions acted as guards and witnesses. The world might believe men shaped the treaties of Europe, but often it was women's whispers in candlelight that softened or sharpened those decisions. But not all visits were political. Some were personal, driven by the hunger for intimacy denied by arranged marriages. A foreign envoy might charm with poetry, a diplomat might linger too long in his gaze, and soon the line between politics and passion blurred. Rumours followed queens across Europe, whispers that Isabella of France found solace with knights far more tender than her husband Edward II, or that Margaret of Valois entertained envoys with more warmth than was considered diplomatic. Whether true or slander, the fact that such rumours existed shows how easily these night meetings became tangled in desire. You can almost see it. The queen standing by a window, the envoy beside her, their words hushed. To her attendants, it is dangerous but familiar. They know to keep their eyes lowered, their faces neutral. Later they may be interrogated. Did you see anything unusual? Did she speak too warmly? And they will answer carefully, balancing loyalty with survival. For the queen's reputation rests not only on what she does, but on what her companions choose to say or not to say afterward. Letters often accompanied these meetings. An envoy might slip a folded note into the queen's hand, pressing it so briefly that anyone watching would mistake it for a casual gesture. She would pass it later to a confidant, who would hide it in her bodice until the chamber was safe. Within those letters could be declarations of love, or intricate codes outlining plans for war. Both were equally dangerous, equally forbidden. For queens, the personal and political were inseparable, their hearts and crowns bound together in every word. Consider Mary, Queen of Scots. During her captivity in England, she relied on secret messengers who carried her letters hidden in barrels of ale. Some of those letters were to foreign allies, plotting her release. Others, scholars suggest, carried tender lines to men she trusted. The line between strategy and affection blurred so much that her enemies used both as evidence of treason. To write to a lover was dangerous. To write to a foreign envoy was dangerous. To meet either in person, even more so. And yet, the forbidden nights gave queens little choice. Imagine now the careful choreography of such a night. The attendants dim candles so that only one or two remain lit. Curtains are drawn tight, muffling the glow. The visitor enters silently, guided by a trusted maid who knows the quietest corridors. The queen greets him softly, her words polite but her eyes alive with unspoken meaning. Perhaps they speak of treaties, perhaps they speak of longing. Either way they keep their voices low, knowing that stone walls echo more than they should. Sometimes these meetings were shielded by piety. The queen might request late-night prayers with a visiting cleric or nobleman. The excuse was devotion, but the truth was diplomacy. Confidantes stood close, their presence a cover. Who would dare suspect scandal when prayer was the pretext? Yet everyone in the chamber knew that such scenes were never only about religion. The chapel that had once been a sanctuary of confession became a stage for diplomacy and desire alike. There was something almost theatrical about it all. The costumes, cloaks, mantles, plain gowns, the staging, windows, balconies, chapels, gardens, the actors, queens, envoys, attendants. Every night became a performance, its script unwritten, its consequences real. A single line misspoken, a single gesture too warm, could set off a storm of gossip. Queens and their companions became master performers, speaking truth in whispers and masking it in ritual. And humour, even here, sometimes crept in. Imagine a queen teasing an envoy. "You risk your neck for this visit. I hope my company is worth at least a treaty." The envoy laughs softly. Attendants smile behind lowered eyes, and for a moment the tension breaks. But soon it returns, heavier than before because everyone knows the jest holds truth. His presence could cost him his life, and hers as well. One quirky tidbit: in some courts, Foreign visitors were tested with gifts of food or drink before being admitted to private chambers. If the visitor refused to eat or drink, suspicion followed. Was he fearful of poison, or did he bring poison himself? Thus attendants often presented small trays of candied fruits or spiced wine at the beginning of these secret meetings. Acceptance signaled trust, refusal raised alarms. Even in the smallest gestures, the balance of danger played out. To modern ears, these clandestine meetings sound like scenes from a spy novel, and in truth, they were not so different. Just as modern intelligence work involved secret exchanges, encrypted messages, and double lives, queens of the past navigated networks of secrecy with their confidantes as their agents. The stakes were the same: power, reputation, survival. As the night wears on, you imagine the visitor departing as quietly as he came. The attendants guide him back through the corridors, past sleeping guards, out through postern doors. The queen remains by the window, her face calm, though her heart still races. In a few hours, she will don her crown, sit in council, and pretend that nothing happened. But the secret words exchanged in the dark will echo in her mind, shaping her choices, guiding her steps. The Confidantes, too, carry the weight. They know what they have seen, what they have heard. Some will bury it in silence. Others will one day repeat it, reshaping events in their telling. For history was not written only by chroniclers, it was whispered, first by servants, murmured by attendants, retold in taverns and courts. What began as a secret meeting could become, within weeks, a scandal that shook kingdom. And yet, the meetings continued. Queens could not live without them. To remain isolated within ceremonial walls was to lose agency. To risk everything in the shadows was to claim some measure of control. Between those two choices, most queens chose the shadows. The chamber falls quiet again. The visitor is gone, the candles burn low, the attendants settle into uneasy sleep. But the queen lies awake, her mind replaying every word, every glance. Was she too bold? Did anyone hear? Will tomorrow bring whispers of tonight? These questions circle endlessly, heavier than crowns, sharper than swords, and yet she would do it again, because the forbidden nights of queens always carried both danger and necessity. Foreign visitors in the shadows, they were never merely guests, they were catalysts, confidantes, lovers, conspirators, and their footsteps fading into the night left trails that shape not only the hearts of queens, but the very histories of kingdoms. The echo of those foreign footsteps fades into silence, but you are not allowed to rest yet. The queen's chambers still hold secrets, not in what is said, but in what is hidden. You turn your eyes away from the balcony and toward the walls themselves, where embroidered tapestries stretch from ceiling to floor. They shimmer faintly in the candlelight, a forest of fabric, scenes of hunts, biblical stories, floral patterns stitched by careful hands. To the casual visitor they are only decoration, another sign of wealth. But to those who know better, these tapestries hid far more than walls. Castles were riddled with hidden passageways, narrow staircases that wound behind fireplaces, doors concealed in paneling, tunnels leading to towers or gardens. They were built for defense, for quick escapes during sieges, but they found another use: secrecy. Behind the heavy cloth of tapestries, a queen could slip away from her attendants, or meet a confidant, or vanish into a corridor that led to safer rooms. The forbidden nights lived in those spaces, where stone and fabric conspired to cloak whispers. Picture it. The queen sits with her ladies, a fire snapping in the hearth, a servant arrives with news, and all eyes turn toward him. In that moment, another figure presses lightly against the edge of a tapestry at the far end of the room. With a soft sway, the fabric gives way, and the queen herself slips behind it, vanishing into darkness. The ladies continue their chatter, pretending nothing is amiss, while she walks barefoot along a hidden stair. Every castle had its secrets. Every queen learned how to use them. One historical account describes Elizabeth of York mother of Henry VIII, using secret doors to move between her apartments and the king's chambers, a convenience for both intimacy and discretion. Others tell of queens in France and Spain who relied on these passageways when councils became too heated, slipping away to chambers where confidantes waited with advice or comfort. The walls, draped in fabric, became allies, allowing queens to move unseen. The tapestries themselves were more than cover, they were symbols. The images chosen often carried messages. A unicorn in a forest might signal purity. A hunt scene might remind visitors of the king's power. Yet for the queen, these embroidered forests and gardens offered something else, a disguise. To part the folds of fabric and vanish behind a woven tree was to step into a secret world, one the courtiers outside could not imagine. You imagine the queen drawing back a corner of tapestry, revealing a low, dark passage. The air inside is cooler, mustier, carrying the scent of damp stone. Her confidant follows, holding a small lamp, shadows dancing wildly on the walls. Their footsteps echo faintly as they move deeper, leaving the chamber's warmth behind. The sound of laughter from the hall fades. Here, in this narrow corridor, their words can be freer. The stone absorbs them, the tapestry conceals them. For a few moments they are safe. Of course, not all hidden passageways were truly secret. Servants often knew them well, using them to move quickly between kitchens and halls. Guards knew too, sometimes waiting in shadows to listen, and sometimes the passageways themselves betrayed their purpose. Footsteps carrying unexpectedly, dust disturbed, doors creaking open at the wrong moment. Queens who relied too much on secrecy risked discovery, and discovery, in a world that thrived on rumour, was almost as dangerous as betrayal. Still, the lure was irresistible. Imagine being watched at every hour, every gesture noted, every word weighed. Wouldn't you yearn for a door that led somewhere private? For queens, tapestries offered that escape. Even if the secrecy was temporary, even if it could not last, it was worth the risk for the chance to whisper without fear. Sometimes these hidden spaces became theatres of forbidden love. Stories swirl of queens meeting lovers in concealed chambers, or exchanging words with envoys hidden behind panels. Chroniclers exaggerated, of course, painting scandal where sometimes only secrecy existed, but the grain of truth is there. Behind those embroidered walls, queens found moments that could never exist in public. A kiss, a promise, a sigh of grief. The tapestry hid not only doors but emotion. A quirky tidbit tells of Catherine de Medici's Louvre apartments, where hidden staircases allowed her to move unseen during the bloody wars of religion. Chroniclers, ever eager for scandal, claimed she used them to spy on her children or to conduct clandestine affairs. Whether or not that was true, the idea stuck. To this day, tourists wander palaces searching for the hidden doors queens once used, half hoping to find traces of their whispered secrets. Humour sometimes surfaced even in these tense escapes. Imagine the queen pausing at the entrance to a narrow stair, muttering, "If I tear my gown on this stone, I'll tell the court it was a new French fashion." Her confidant laughs softly, tension breaking for a moment. Even in secrecy, queens found ways to make the danger bearable. A joke in the dark made the passage less suffocating, the risk less sharp. It is not difficult to see the modern parallel. Secret passageways are gone, but people still crave hidden spaces. Think of private text messages, encrypted apps, passwords protecting conversations from prying eyes. Today's secrecy hums in phones and screens, but the impulse is the same. The tapestry has simply become digital. For queens, stone walls and embroidered cloth provided cover. For you it is pixels and encryption. But the need to whisper beyond surveillance is timeless. The queen emerges now in your imagination, stepping out from behind a tapestry into a smaller, quieter room. Her confidant closes the hidden door behind them, pulling the fabric flush so no one suspects. They sit together on a bench, their words tumbling out. Complaints about ministers, worries about succession, longings they dare not admit elsewhere. The secret chamber becomes a world apart, a pocket of truth carved into the heart of a palace built on appearances. Sometimes these passageways saved lives. During uprisings or sieges, queens escaped through them to safer rooms or even out of the castle entirely. Chronicles tell of women slipping into the night through hidden postern doors while rebels stormed the gates. To courtiers, the queen seemed untouchable. But in truth, her survival often depended on knowing which tapestry concealed a stair and which panel gave way to a tunnel. But more often, the passageways saved sanity. To live always in ceremony was suffocating. A queen who could step, even for a moment, into a hidden corridor could breathe differently. She could drop the mask of grace, slump her shoulders, mutter curses, laugh too loudly. For those few stolen minutes, she was not a queen, but simply a woman reclaiming her own body, her own words, her own breath. And always, the Confidantes were part of it. They held the lamps, they closed the doors, they sat in the dark, whispering encouragement. They were both accomplices and witnesses, their silence as important as their loyalty. Without them, the tapestries hid nothing. With them, they concealed worlds. The candles in your imagination burn lower. The queen returns at last through the hidden door, smoothing her gown, her face calm. To anyone who enters, she has been here all along, seated serenely beneath the embroidered unicorns and hunting scenes. The truth, the whispered secrets behind the walls, remains invisible. This was the paradox of the forbidden nights. The very walls that seemed to confine queens also sheltered their freedom. Tapestries that told stories of saints and hunters also concealed the truer stories, the ones no chronicler dared to write. To live as a queen was to perform endlessly, but to step behind the fabric was to reclaim, for a heartbeat, the right to be unobserved. And so, the next time you imagine a queen seated in her chamber, do not look only at the jewels or the silks. Look at the walls. Notice the folds of fabric swaying slightly in the draught, for behind them may lie the truest theatre of all, the hidden passageways where power, love, and danger moved unseen. But the risk was never forgotten. More than one queen fell because of jewels. A gift from a foreign visitor could be twisted into evidence of treason. A ring exchanged in private could fuel rumors of adultery, and when inventories of jewels were taken after a queen's downfall, each piece became a relic of suspicion. What had once been beauty turned to evidence. Still, queens embraced the practice. In worlds where their voices were muffled, jewels spoke for them. A brooch on the left shoulder instead of the right could say more than hours of counsel. A ring gifted quietly to a confidant could bind loyalty tighter than chains. A necklace shimmering with pearls could remind a lover of promises never spoken aloud. The night deepens in your imagination. The queen sits in her chamber, her jewels catching the glow of the last candle. To her courtiers, they are ornaments. To her confidantes, they are messages. And to her they are the delicate balance between silence and survival. For in the forbidden nights of queens, even gold and gems became conspirators, glittering quietly in the dark. The jewels fade into stillness, their coded glimmers softening as the candles gutter low. Yet the queen's chamber remains the most dangerous stage of all. Not the council halls, not the banquets, not even the chapel could equal the intimacy of the queen's own bed. The bed was not simply a place to sleep. It was a battlefield, a throne, a stage for politics and passion alike. Every sigh, every movement, every presence within it carried meaning far beyond flesh and comfort. To step into a queen's bedchamber was to enter the most forbidden territory of all. Picture it now, the massive bed frame, carved from oak or walnut, its canopy draped in embroidered cloth, heavy as armor, rich curtains hung down on all sides, designed not only for warmth, but for secrecy. Within that enclosed space, a queen might find her only semblance of privacy, though even then, attendants hovered nearby, ready to serve at any moment. Her bed was supposed to be a sanctum, but in truth it was more like a stage where audiences shifted depending on who was allowed inside. The public rituals surrounding queens' beds would astonish modern eyes. In many courts, queens were not allowed to retire in solitude. Instead, the ceremonial putting to bed involved a host of attendants who undressed her, removed her jewels, and arranged her sheets before leaving. Sometimes, even courtiers were permitted to witness this ritual, under the guise of honoring her dignity. Imagine the suffocation of such moments, stripping down not only gowns but pretense, with half the court watching as if it were a performance. Privacy was a luxury queens rarely owned, and yet once the curtains were drawn and the room dimmed, another life began. Here, confidantes became indispensable. They warmed stones to place at her feet, whispered comfort when illness or fear kept her awake, and carried news or notes slipped beneath pillows. They also heard the most forbidden murmurs, the words spoken in exhaustion or longing that no one else was meant to hear. For queens, the bed was not simply a place of rest, it was the space where vulnerability could no longer be hidden. Consider the pressures that pressed against those pillows. A queen's marriage bed was the proving ground of dynasties. Courtiers waited eagerly for news of pregnancy, calculating the future of kingdoms on the rhythm of her cycles. Attendants were often tasked with keeping track, quietly noting when the queen complained of pain or when she missed her courses. Even her most intimate bodily functions became matters of politics, whispered about in council as if they were treaties. The bed was never hers alone. It belonged to the realm, but alongside politics came the forbidden. In the shadows of those curtains, queens found moments of intimacy that defied the rigid expectations of court. Sometimes with their husbands, sometimes with confidantes, sometimes with lovers whose names could never be spoken. Chroniclers hinted at scandals. Isabella of France accused of liaisons while her husband neglected her. Margaret of Valois whispered to have lovers smuggled into her apartments. Whether true or slander, the mere existence of such rumours reveals how closely people associated queens' beds with intrigue. You imagine it, the queen reclining against her pillows, the weight of her crown long gone, her hair unbound across the sheets. The confidant sits at the edge of the bed, holding her hand, listening as she confesses doubts or desires. Their voices are low, almost drowned by the crackle of the hearth. The attendants outside think she is resting, only here does she truly breathe. In that moment, the bed becomes both sanctuary and confession booth. The irony is sharp. What should have been a place of softness and peace was instead charged with danger. A queen who refused her husband's bed might be accused of disobedience. A queen whose bed was too frequently visited by others might be accused of adultery. Even in sleep, she could not escape judgment. Chroniclers noted when queens slept too much, too little, with whom, in what manner. Imagine closing your eyes each night, knowing that your rest itself might become gossip by morning. Yet the bed was also a tool of power. A clever queen could use intimacy to influence her husband, guiding his decisions with whispers that came only in the dark. Catherine de' Medici, though often portrayed as distant, was said to time her conversations with Henry II during private moments, when he was most likely to listen. To outsiders, she was silent. To him, she was persuasive. The bed was her council chamber, as much as the great hall was his. And humour, even here, slipped through the weight. Imagine a queen sighing after a long day of ceremony. If one more bishop tells me how to behave, I'll invite him to take my place in this bed and see how he manages. Her confidantes laugh softly, careful not to be overheard, but grateful for the release. The joke masks the exhaustion but also speaks truth. Everyone judged the queen's bed, yet no one else carried its burden. A quirky detail from Renaissance France notes that queens sometimes entertained close companions in bed, not in scandal, but in intimacy of another sort. Attendants might sit beside her under the covers during cold nights, chatting or reading aloud from saints' lives. The sight of 2 or 3 women huddled in the great royal bed would have startled courtiers had they entered, but for the queen it was comfort. To modern eyes, it might resemble a sleepover. For her, it was the rare chance to be warm, human, and unguarded. The symbolism of beds also carried weight in political theatre. Royal births were often conducted in bedchambers crowded with witnesses to ensure no trickery. The Queen's bed, draped in crimson cloth, became a public stage where heirs entered the world. Conversely, sick beds turned into arenas of succession, with factions gathering outside while queens hovered between life and death. Even in illness, she could not escape scrutiny. A queen's bed was never only hers. You feel the claustrophobia now. Curtains drawn, attendants murmuring outside, every breath measured by expectation. Yet inside that space, secrets blossomed, a lover's kiss, a confidant's promise, a whispered prayer, all forbidden, all hidden beneath embroidered cloth. If walls had ears, then beds had memory, carrying truths no historian could ever capture. To modern sensibilities, the lack of privacy seems unbearable. Yet think of your own time, how celebrities' bedrooms are speculated upon in magazines, how intimate details of public figures' lives are dissected endlessly. The Queen's bed was the medieval version of tabloids, its every rumour magnified into scandal. The difference was that for her, gossip could end not only reputations but lives. Still, queens endured. They learned to perform even in bed, to control their sighs, to time their laughter, to disguise their longings. Their confidantes helped, smoothing pillows, soothing nerves, shielding secrets. Without them, the Queen's bed would have been only a prison. With them it became a fragile sanctuary. And so you picture the Queen now, lying beneath heavy blankets, her confidants sitting close. They speak softly until her eyes grow heavy. Outside, the court hums with intrigue, courtiers whispering about wars and air. But here, for one brief night, the Queen drifts towards sleep with a hand clasped in loyalty, a secret kept safe. Her bed, so public and political, has given her one small gift, the illusion of peace. By dawn, the curtains will part, the rituals will return, the scrutiny will resume. But for now, in the forbidden night, she allows herself to rest, her secrets stitched into the silence of her pillows. The bed, that stage of power and vulnerability, never kept its secrets forever. When a queen's confidant broke silence, willingly or not, the consequences were devastating. In the precarious world of courts, where every whisper could topple thrones, the punishments for betrayal were harsh, sometimes cruel beyond measure. You lean closer now, imagining the tension thick in the Queen's chamber, where trust could dissolve overnight into accusation, and loyalty could turn into a noose. Consider the role these women played. Confidantes carried letters, brewed potions, hid jewels, fastened cloaks for midnight escapades. They knew the Queen's most intimate truths, her longings, her illnesses, her fears. That knowledge was both power and peril. To keep it was to live as the invisible shield of her mistress. To reveal it was to destroy not only the Queen but also oneself. Punishments for betrayal varied. The mildest was dismissal, being sent away from court, stripped of titles or income. For some, this meant a quiet return to a family estate, but even that was often tinged with shame. A dismissed confidant carried rumours with her, and families sometimes found themselves ostracized. More severe was imprisonment, often in remote castles or convents, where silence was enforced by stone and prayer. At worst, there was execution, the ultimate warning to others that silence was not optional but life itself. Anne Boleyn's downfall provides a chilling example. When Henry VIII turned against her, her ladies-in-waiting were interrogated mercilessly. They revealed details of her conversations, her moods, even the way she laughed with certain men. Some spoke out of fear, some perhaps out of spite, some simply because silence was impossible under pressure. Their words, twisted and magnified, became the scaffold on which she lost her crown and her head. For her companions, survival came at the price of betrayal, and history has never absolved them. Even when Confidantes remained loyal, suspicion could condemn them. Queens accused of scandal often dragged their attendants down with them. Margaret of Anjou's ladies were imprisoned during the Wars of the Roses, simply for serving too faithfully, their loyalty seen as complicity. Loyalty was no shield. Proximity alone was enough to breed suspicion. Imagine being dragged from the Queen's chamber at dawn, protesting innocence, knowing your only crime was listening when she wept. Sometimes betrayal came not from malice, but from desperation. A maid whose family faced debt might be bribed to share secrets. A noblewoman hoping to advance her family's power might hint at the Queen's confidences to her father or brother. The temptation was enormous, the consequences devastating, and yet, when discovered, excuses mattered little. The Queen's anger could be swift, and kings even swifter. A broken silence was treated as treason. There's a quirky detail from French court records. Attendants who revealed too much gossip were sometimes punished by being forced into convent life, their voices bound by vows of silence. It is almost ironic, women who spoke too freely condemned to lifetimes where speech was restricted to hymns and prayers. For some, this was exile worse than death. For others, perhaps, it was a strange form of peace. You can almost hear the weight of silence pressing down on these women. Imagine a confidante being questioned. Did she speak fondly of him? Did she ever complain of the king? Her lips tremble, her words falter. To remain silent is to risk being tortured. To speak is to betray the woman she served, the woman whose hair she brushed each night, whose secret she carried in her very skin. What would you do in her place? The choice was impossible. Humour sometimes flickered even here, though darkly. Imagine a queen sighing to her companions. If you ever betray me, at least make sure the gossip is interesting. Nervous laughter ripples through the chamber, but no one misses the edge beneath her words. Jokes about betrayal were like gallows humour, sharp reminders that silence was as fragile as the candle flames that lit their nights. Modern life offers its own reflections. Today, scandals erupt when private conversations are leaked, and confidences are betrayed in interviews or memoirs. The stage has changed. Microphones instead of tapestries, tabloids instead of chroniclers. But the fear remains the same, that someone close will break the trust that shields the private self from the public gaze. Medieval queens lived under that fear constantly, with punishments far harsher than a bad headline. The punishments also served a purpose beyond justice. They were warnings. When a maid was dismissed, imprisoned, or executed, others took note. Silence became stitched into the culture of service, each punishment a thread in the fabric of fear. Queens themselves sometimes orchestrated these punishments, not out of cruelty but necessity. Better to lose one confidant than to risk losing all. Trust was a garden they tended with both tenderness and pruning, and yet, despite the danger, queens continued to confide. They could not help it. To remain silent forever was to suffocate. And so they whispered still, knowing betrayal was possible, knowing punishment was certain if silence broke. Perhaps they hoped their own loyalty, their own kindness, would secure devotion. Perhaps they simply could not endure the burden alone. Imagine a queen confronting a confidant who betrayed her. The chamber is cold, the air thick with incense meant to mask tension. The queen's voice is calm, almost gentle. Why? The confidant stares at the floor, unable to answer. Was it money? Fear? Ambition? Perhaps even love for someone else? The queen dismisses her with a flick of a hand. Though her heart breaks, that loss is sharper than any political defeat. For a queen, betrayal by a confidant was not just treason. It was heartbreak, the shattering of the only intimacy she possessed. Still, some confidantes held their silence to the grave. Their loyalty cost them dearly, sometimes exile, sometimes torture, sometimes death. But they never spoke, carrying secrets like relics buried within them. These women remain invisible in chronicles, their names barely recorded, but their silence shaped history as much as any treaty or war. For without their loyalty, the the forbidden nights of queens would never have survived. The chamber quiets in your mind. You see the queen seated by the fire, her remaining confidants gathered close, their faces tense. One of their own has been dismissed, punished, erased. The air feels heavier, the silence deeper, and yet the queen speaks softly, thanking them for their loyalty, reassuring them with her gaze. They nod, murmuring vows, though each knows how fragile trust truly is. The candles flicker, shadows lengthen, and the forbidden night stretches on, haunted by the knowledge that silence is both shield and noose. Because in the world of queens, punishments for broken silence were not only about justice, they were about power, fear, and survival. And in the end, they were reminders that trust, once betrayed, could never fully return. The memory of punishment still lingers like a bitter taste, but soon the atmosphere changes. What the queen and her confidantes whispered behind curtains or hid behind jewels did not always stay locked away. Stories leaked, rumors grew, myths swirled like smoke through taverns, corridors, and marketplaces. By morning, what had been a sigh in the queen's chamber could become a scandal, shouted across kingdoms. The forbidden nights of queens never remained completely private, for gossip was a currency as valuable as gold, and people spent it freely. Imagine stepping into a medieval tavern. The air is thick with the smell of ale and sweat, the benches crowded with soldiers, merchants, and travellers. A bard strums a lute, half singing, half mocking the nobility. In the corner, a man leans close to his drinking companion and mutters, "They say the queen never sleeps alone, but not always with the king." His friend chuckles, repeating it a little louder. Soon the rumour spreads table to table, growing sharper with each retelling. By dawn, a story born of a single whisper in a chamber has reached the ears of servants, guards, and merchants alike. And once gossip left the palace walls, there was no calling it back. History is littered with such rumours. Anne Boleyn was accused of affairs with multiple men, even her own brother, accusations that most historians now dismiss as political invention, but which, at the time, circulated with wild enthusiasm. Marie Antoinette was slandered with pamphlets depicting her in orgies and unnatural relationships, many of them absurd fantasies crafted by her enemies. Catherine the Great was smeared with grotesque tales too infamous to repeat, designed not only to destroy her reputation, but to turn her very body into a public spectacle. None of these rumours needed to be true. Their power lay in being told and retold until they shaped how queens were remembered. Closer to the medieval world, Eleanor of Aquitaine was accused of improper closeness with her uncle during the Crusades, a story whispered by chroniclers eager to undermine her authority. Whether she ever committed such an act was irrelevant. The rumour itself was enough to shadow her reputation. Queens were rarely granted the benefit of innocence. In the court of public opinion, the suggestion of scandal was often as damning as fact. Why were these rumours so irresistible? Perhaps because queens represented both power and mystery. Ordinary people rarely saw them up close. They appeared in processions, distant and glittering, untouchable as icons, and so gossip filled the gap between what was seen and what was imagined. If a queen looked serene, it must be an act. If she looked weary, it must be scandal. Her forbidden nights became canvases onto which courtiers and commoners painted whatever story they pleased. Confidantes often became unwilling fuel for these tales. A maid dismissed from service might carry whispers to her family. A noblewoman, jealous of her rival's closeness to the queen, might hint at improprieties. A servant overhearing laughter at midnight might repeat it, embellishing as it passed from mouth to mouth. Soon the queen herself would hear the stories, twisted beyond recognition. Imagine her fury, or perhaps her weary sigh, knowing she could never fully erase what others chose to believe. Sometimes the rumours became almost theatrical. In France, pamphleteers printed scandalous stories of queens in cheap booklets, selling them in marketplaces where peasants devoured every lurid detail. A single pamphlet could destroy years of careful reputation building. Yet for ordinary people, These stories were irresistible entertainment. They allowed them to imagine that queens, those distant figures draped in jewels, were as flawed and foolish as anyone else. In truth, such gossip was a form of control, a way for powerless subjects to assert themselves against the image of royal perfection. But gossip was not always cruel. Sometimes it softened queens into human figures. In England, tales of Elizabeth I laughing heartily with her ladies, or joking at court, spread warmth rather than scandal. For subjects who only saw her in portraits of stern majesty, these glimpses of humanity made her seem approachable, even beloved. Rumours could destroy, but they could also endear. The problem was that queens could never control which kind of rumour would spread. Humour often appeared in these myths, even if it was sharp-edged. Imagine a jester teasing during a feast. The queen must love prayer, her knees are sore every morning. The courtiers laugh, some nervously, some cruelly, while the queen forces a smile. Everyone knows the joke isn't really about prayer. In such moments, humour became a weapon, wielded under the cloak of jest, but aimed at the queen's most vulnerable place, her reputation. One quirky tidbit from Tudor England: when Elizabeth I delayed marriage year after year, gossip spread that she was either secretly in love with Robert Dudley or incapable of intimacy altogether. Both rumours were whispered with equal fervour, though they contradicted each other entirely. The truth mattered less than the telling. People preferred scandal to silence, and so Elizabeth herself learned to play with these stories, never confirming, never denying, allowing the mystery to enhance her authority. Sometimes the smartest response to rumour was to let it swirl unchecked, turning scandal into myth. But not every queen had Elizabeth's resilience. For some, the weight of gossip was unbearable. Marie Antoinette, isolated in Versailles, heard the vicious pamphlets and knew how deeply they poisoned her image. She could not undo them, and they contributed to the fury that eventually swept her to the guillotine. Rumours killed as surely as swords. For queens, the myths of their knights were not merely stories. They were weapons wielded by enemies, sharpened by repetition, and aimed directly at their crowns. Imagine the queen in her chamber, hearing that the taverns hum with her supposed scandal. She leans back against her pillows, her confidantes at her side, their faces pale with worry. "They say I spend my nights in sin," she mutters bitterly. One attendant squeezes her hand and whispers, "Then let them believe. Only we know the truth." But the queen knows better. In courts, perception is truth. What people believe shapes what power remains. She cannot fight every rumour. She can only hope her dignity outshines them. Modern life makes this strangely familiar. Celebrities today find their private lives dissected in tabloids, online forums, social media feeds. A single photograph, taken out of context, becomes evidence of scandal. A whispered story becomes a headline. The Queen's forbidden nights echo in your own time, their myths reborn in digital form. The methods differ, but the hunger for gossip is unchanged. Still, even gossip carried a strange kind of immortality. Facts were buried, but rumours endured. Queens who might otherwise be forgotten live on in tales of scandal. Few remember the exact policies of Eleanor of Aquitaine, but many recall the rumours of her love life. Few know the details of Catherine de' Medici's counsels, but many know the whispers of her poisons. Scandal outlasts substance. For better or worse, it carved their names into memory, and so you return in imagination to the Queen's chamber. The curtains are drawn, the candles nearly out. Outside, gossip spreads like wildfire, twisting her forbidden nights into scandalous tales. But inside she sits quietly, her confidantes close, her secrets still safe. For now, she knows she cannot control the world beyond these walls. She can only guard what happens within them, trusting that truth, however fragile, will survive in the silence of those who remain loyal. The myths and rumours may echo through taverns and chronicles, reshaping her image into something she cannot recognise. But the forbidden nights themselves, the laughter, the whispers, the glances shared in shadow, belong only to her and to those who were there, and those no rumor can ever truly steal. The smoke of rumor drifts out into the world, twisting queens into scandalous figures, but within the chambers the truth is simpler and sharper. The risk of loving too deeply. Every queen who leaned too far into trust, who bound her heart too tightly to a confidant, stood on a knife's edge, for in the rigid machinery of dynastic politics, affection itself was forbidden. A queen could be admired, feared, revered, but not allowed to love freely. To do so risked not only her reputation but her throne, her family, even her life. You picture her seated on the edge of her bed, crown removed, shoulders slumped. At her side kneels a woman she trusts more than any counselor, more even than her husband. The queen speaks of her loneliness, of her frustration with the endless scrutiny, of her desire to be seen not as a symbol but as herself. The confidant listens, eyes steady, lips pressed closed, not judging. In that moment the bond between them deepens into something heavier than loyalty. It is not merely service, it is love, and it is dangerous. Love in a queen's world was a double-edged sword. It offered the comfort of intimacy, the solace of being known, but it also created vulnerability. A confidant who held her love could, if betrayed, destroy her utterly. Worse still, others could seize upon that love as a weapon. Even the suspicion of affection too strong could fuel rumors of scandal. You remember how Elizabeth I's friendship with Robert Dudley was whispered into gossip. Even though their intimacy may never have crossed the line of propriety, courtiers transformed it into accusations. Love, or even the hint of it, was never safe. Yet queens still risked it, because without love, their lives became unbearable. Consider Anne of Austria, Queen of France in the 17th century. Isolated and distrusted, she found solace in the friendship of confidants and confessors. When she grew close to Cardinal Mazarin, rumors painted it as a love affair. Whether it was political partnership, affection, or passion, the risk of loving too deeply hung over her every choice. But without that bond, she would have been alone, a pawn without strength. Sometimes, the love was not romantic at all, but maternal or sisterly. A queen might treat her confidant as the sister she had left behind, or the daughter she had lost. Still, others saw danger. Affection too strong could be interpreted as favoritism, fueling jealousy among other nobles. The court was a hive of envy, where even kindness could be twisted into scandal. Loving too deeply, in any form, was perilous. Imagine the queen slipping a small gift into her confidant's hand, a ring, a ribbon, a miniature portrait. To her it is a token of gratitude and love. To outsiders, if discovered, it is evidence of favoritism at best, corruption at worst. The confidant wears it close to her heart, knowing its meaning, but also knowing it could doom them both if revealed. Humour sometimes softened the edge. Perhaps the queen joked, "If they accuse me of loving you too much, let them. They'll be jealous they don't earn the same." The confidant laughs, but beneath it both women know the truth. Affection is the most dangerous thing the queen can offer. It binds them together, but it paints a target on their backs. One quirky tidbit survives from Tudor England. Queen Mary I was so devoted to one of her ladies-in-waiting that she was mocked for keeping the woman constantly at her side. Chroniclers exaggerated their closeness, implying scandal, though in truth it may have been only friendship. Yet even pure companionship was dangerous when magnified by suspicion. For queens, the boundary between love and scandal was not defined by what they did, but by what others believed, and sometimes the risk was not suspicion but heartbreak. Imagine a confidant forced into marriage with another noble, leaving the queen bereft, her letters unanswered, her chamber emptier, her heart heavy, or worse. Imagine a confidant betraying her love, revealing her secrets in exchange for safety or favour. The queen, who risked everything by loving, finds herself wounded by the very bond that once sustained her. In those moments, love turned from salvation to weapon. Yet despite the risks, queens clung to it, because without love, without trust, without affection, Their lives became cages of ceremony. A crown may glitter, but it cannot warm. A throne may elevate, but it cannot comfort. Only love, forbidden though it was, could pierce the loneliness of power. And so queens risked everything, time and again, to feel even a moment of genuine connection. You can almost feel the heaviness of it. The queen sits with her confidant, hands entwined, both knowing that their bond could destroy them. But in that moment, neither cares. The world outside is filled with suspicion, betrayal, and scrutiny. Inside, for a heartbeat, there is love, and sometimes that heartbeat was worth more than a kingdom. To modern minds, this danger might feel familiar. Today, public figures risk scandal when private relationships are exposed, when intimacy becomes fodder for headlines. The Queen's forbidden love is echoed in every celebrity whose private texts are leaked, whose photos are stolen, whose affection becomes entertainment for the masses. The hunger to expose love, to twist it into scandal, is timeless. But there is a difference. For queens, love was not only scandalous, it was treasonous. To love outside the strict boundaries of duty was to risk being branded unfit, unchaste, disloyal. Even innocent love could be fatal if it threatened dynastic expectations. For a queen, the heart was the most dangerous organ of all. And yet, despite the peril, the forbidden nights of queens were filled with love. Not always dramatic, not always scandalous, but love nonetheless, whispered between friends, confessed between confidantes, sometimes acted upon, often hidden forever. Love was their rebellion, their solace, their risk. Without it, they would have been statues trapped in crowns and gowns. With it, they became human, fragile, yearning, alive. Imagine the queen at dawn, rising from bed, her confidant smoothing her gown. Their eyes meet briefly, the bond unspoken but undeniable. In the hours to come, the queen will sit in council, perform rituals, endure scrutiny, but in her heart she carries that glance, that bond, that love, dangerous, forbidden, but hers. Because the risk of loving too deeply was real, but the risk of never loving at all was worse. And so, queens chose the danger, again and again, weaving their forbidden nights with threads of affection strong enough to defy crowns, councils, and even history itself. The chamber is quiet now, the candles long burn to pools of wax, the tapestries heavy with secrets. You have walked through their world, the jewels, the disguises, the letters, the punishments, the risks of love, and yet something lingers, something softer than scandal, slower than rumor. What endures is not only the stories themselves, but the echoes they left behind. The forbidden nights of queens did not vanish with dawn. They drifted forward through centuries, reshaped into myths, songs, and whispers, carried until they became part of how we remember power itself. Picture a queen centuries ago, leaning close to her confidant, whispering a fear into the dark. Neither of them imagined that historians would one day pore over scraps of her letters, that pamphleteers would twist her sighs into scandal, that storytellers would embroider her loneliness into legend. Yet that is what happened. The echoes of those nights seeped into chronicles and gossip alike, leaving behind a shadowed portrait, queens not only as rulers, but as women caught between crowns and hearts. Consider Mary, Queen of Scots. Her letters, intercepted and decoded, condemned her to death. Centuries later, people still read them, not as political documents alone, but as glimpses into her private world. Her words, written by candlelight, became immortal echoes of her forbidden nights. Or take Catherine de' Medici, painted by history as a mistress of poisons and plots. Much of that reputation comes not from fact, but from whispers of what she might have done behind chamber doors. The truth matters less than the echo, and in that echo she survives. Even when rumours were cruel, they granted queens a strange kind of immortality. Eleanor of Aquitaine, accused of scandal during the Crusades, still walks through history's pages as a woman of fire and desire. Marie Antoinette, smeared with grotesque tales, still lingers in memory as the embodiment of decadence. Scandal kept their names alive, long after treaties and wars were forgotten. It is unfair, even tragic, but it is also undeniable. The forbidden knights outlived the crowns. And what of the Confidantes? Their names are mostly lost, buried in margins, reduced to titles like the Queen's favourite maid, or a lady of her chamber. Yet their silence or their whispers shaped everything. They were the ones who carried letters, hid jewels, smuggled visitors, held hands in the dark. They were the guardians of forbidden nights, and though history forgot them, their presence is stitched invisibly into every story of queens. The Queen's secrets could not have existed without them. Their loyalty, their betrayals, their very existence echo forward too, ghostly and nameless. The echoes are not only scandal and survival, but tenderness as well. In Chronicles, you glimpse moments where queens and their women shared laughter, tears, comfort. These fragments remind you that behind every rumour was something real, human connection, and perhaps that is the truest echo, that even within cages of gold, queens longed, loved, and trusted, just as anyone does. The forbidden nights strip away the grandeur and reveal the human heartbeat beneath the crown. You think of modern times now. Public figures still live under scrutiny, their private lives exposed, their affections twisted into stories. The tabloids of today are heirs to the pamphlets of yesterday, the paparazzi to the court chroniclers. The echoes of Queen's forbidden nights linger in every headline that speculates about who holds whose hand, who laughs too loudly, who slips away unseen. History repeats itself, only with brighter lights and faster tongues. And yet, the echoes also live in gentler ways. Novels reimagine queens' inner worlds, films dramatize their secrets, songs and plays retell their scandals. People remain fascinated, not only by their power, but by their humanity, their forbidden nights, their hidden loves, their whispered fears. We keep retelling these stories because they remind us that even at the heights of authority, loneliness is real, desire is dangerous, and trust is fragile. Imagine now the Queen's chamber, at the very end of her life. She lies in her bed, the canopy heavy overhead, the curtains drawn. Around her are ministers, clerics, perhaps even her children. But in the corner, silent and unseen, stands a confidant, maybe the same one who once laughed with her in gardens, who once held her secrets in chapels, who once guided her through hidden doors. Their eyes meet briefly, and in that gaze passes all that cannot be spoken, the forbidden nights, the love, the danger, the survival. Soon the Queen will be gone, her secrets fading into the earth, but the confidant will carry them a little longer, until silence swallows them too, and then come the echoes. The chroniclers will write, the pamphlets will slander, the myths will grow. People will remember the Queen not only for her crown, but for her whispers, not only for her reign, but for her forbidden nights. Some of it will be false, some cruel, some exaggerated, but buried within, there will always remain the truth, that she was human, that she loved, that she trusted, that she risked. Now the night grows softer, the flicker of candles dims to embers, the air heavy with smoke and perfume. The echoes of centuries grow faint, like voices carried on the wind. You feel them receding, not lost, but quieter, settling into the long hush of history. The queens are gone, their confidants forgotten, but their nights still murmur through time, faint and persistent, like a lullaby half remembered. And you, lying here in the present, are part of that echo too. For as you listen, as you imagine, as you let the forbidden nights unfold in your mind, you keep them alive. Their secrets linger not only in chronicles but in your memory now. You carry them with you, another link in the long chain of whispers.